Broadcasting live. It's America's longest running talk show on computers. It's Computer America, bringing you the biggest names in technology with guest interviews, new products, and your emails. Listen live at computeramerica.com on any device around the world. Email the show at live@computeramerica.com or find us on social media. Be sure to check out our website for contests, giveaways, show notes, live video stream, podcasts, and more. You're listening to Computer America.
Hello and welcome into the Computer America Show. We are the nation's longest running, nationally syndicated radio talk show on computers and technology. Thank you for joining us once again. I am your host, Ben Crossman. Wow, what a show we have for you today. Of course, we are going to have on, they were just on a couple of months ago. We had another gentleman from the same, from the same organization. But now we have the big man himself, Mr. Jon Peddie of Jon Peddie Research. And yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. And, we're going to talk all about GPUs, systems, miscellaneous, all things graphics. It's going to be a really good show for those of you who maybe, we do kind of sometimes assume a lot of information on the side of the listener. So this will be a good one to, kind of get back to brass tacks and to, just kind of go over all the basics and then get into some of the important questions as we talk about, things like displays and graphics cards and, so on and so on and so on. It's going to be a great show. And again, we have Dr. Jon Peddie here joining us, who is the president of Jon Peddie Research. So, but before we get into that, a couple things, including computeramerica.com. That's where you'll find anything and everything having to do with today's show, be it a link to our guest website, be it any articles that we do later on in the program. Just anything that happens on today's show can be found in the show notes. Very convenient. So if you're busy, if you are working out, don't worry, we have you covered. And yeah, you can find that at computeramerica.com. While you're there, let's see, be sure to sign up for the contest. Tomorrow, we will be giving away another prize from our friends over at Logitech, which we do every single Friday. And also be sure to check out the video portion of the show. That's right. So you can not only listen to Computer America, but you can watch us as well. Not mandatory, just something that, hey, we enjoy doing and enjoy putting on. So with all of that said, why don't we just jump into today's show? And again, Dr. Jon Peddie, he is the president of Jon Peddie Research, and joining us to explain all about graphics, what they do, and, things that you guys should know. And, hey, happy to have him on. So, Dr. Jon Peddie, thank you for joining us here on Computer America.
Hello there. Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure, our pleasure. So, like I said, for anyone out there who wants to check out, the last time we had a gentleman from Jon Peddie Research, I believe it was August 23rd, and you can go back, of course, check out the archives. But we're going to, start with the basics here. And so, Jon, start off with how did Jon Peddie Research, kind of get started, and what is your background? What led you to start this?
Well, as I like to tell people, I used to have an honest job. I used to be an engineer, and started a couple of companies, and decided that I had done enough, and I would retire. And then I started getting phone calls from former investors and customers asking me if I would help them with a project here and there. And because I'm ever so smart, I quickly figured out I was in the consulting business. And so I realized that, it's actually kind of fun and something I really always wanted to do anyway. So here was an opportunity to do it. And I did. And in the process of that, we found that we had to, and I started hiring some people. And so we found that we had to write reports for people. And then I realized, again, being ever quick, that I was also in the publishing business. And so that's what we've been doing for the past almost 30 years now, is writing reports, consulting with clients, and tracking things that influence pixels. So we worry about anything that captures a pixel, modifies it, displays it, transmits it, whatever. But if a pixel is involved, then we're interested in it. And we're pretty technical about it. So we get into the nitty-gritty, so to speak. But at the same time, we also try and keep track of what the market dynamics are. So we measure how many GPUs, for example, are being shipped from PCs and how many are being shipped from mobile devices and workstations and other things like that. So we have a pretty broad reach of data. And then, because there's actually 25 hours in a day, we find time to test these things to see if they are actually living up to expectations and promises. And that gives us a nice hands-on experience. So that's pretty much what we do.
Yeah. No, and makes perfect sense. And I'm sure with with all that data and being able to put together these reports, you start seeing trends that a lot of people and a lot of companies find very interesting. So I think for the purposes of our show, we're going to talk about just kind of graphics, how where it got started, how it evolved, and where it is today. Because we are consumer oriented. And I think a good place to start with that would be, let's start graphics and graphics cards, and GPUs. I think at this point, it's right up there with the motherboard, with the CPU. It's one of the most dynamic, and you have a lot of choice when it comes to this part of a computer. So why don't you give us a little bit of background, if you would, about GPUs and kind of where they came from and how they've gotten to the point where you can go to a place and get 18 different kinds of graphics cards.
Mm-hmm. Sure. It's interesting because the term GPU, which stands for Graphics Processor Unit, a GPU is actually a chip, and yet people have come to think of it as being a product, a board, graphics board, for example. And so they talk about, I went out and got a new GPU. Well, they maybe did get a new GPU, but they also got a circuit board with some memory on it and some power regulation on it and a fan and a few other things. Mm-hmm. And so what they really got was what we call an add-in board, or an AIB. But the term GPU, it's kind of a fun term, and it sounds nice and it's easy to use. So it does get used interchangeably with the term AIB. But the difficulty with that is that there are two types of GPUs. And the first type is what's called a discrete GPU, where there is a separate chip that's on a circuit board, the add-in board, and that circuit board has its own private and very high-speed memory, and a lot of it, by the way, gigabytes of it. And so that's a device, but you also can find a GPU that is inside another chip, which is the CPU, the processor. And so you've heard of Intel and AMD and x86 and so forth. So x86 is the architecture of the processor chip, and within that processor chip, both AMD and Intel are building GPUs. So you have to differentiate a little bit when you're talking about GPUs as to whether you mean an integrated one or a discrete one. And that's the reason it's probably better, if you can remember to do it, to say AIB or add-in board when that's what you're referring to, rather than just GPU, because if you bump into somebody who wants to be pedantic and be a know-it-all, he or she is immediately going to say, well, are you talking about integrated or discrete? And then you have to go through that elaborate discussion. Now, just a side point about that difference is that a discrete GPU, as I mentioned, has its own private and very high speed and large capacity of memory. The integrated GPU that you find in your processor, it has to share memory with the CPU. And that memory is called system memory. That's what you hear as DDR3 or DDR4. And so that memory is a little bit, more than a little bit, slower than the graphics memory that you get on an add-in board. So an add-in board has what's called G, as in graphics, DDR, and that comes in numbers, GDDR4, GDDR5, and so forth. There's a 6 coming. And so the performance of a graphics processor is largely determined by the memory. And so how much access you can get to the memory, how fast you can read and write things in and out of the memory, how fast the memory it is itself, and how much you have of it. All of those are important influences on your performance. So if you're a gamer, for example, where performance is important to you, then you really want an add-in board with its own dedicated memory so that it can run independently of the CPU and whatever it's doing. So there's a little tutorial on
Right, and then just for those of you who are thinking, wow, now I can go out and build my own computer. I mean, just to be clear, that a lot of these numbers that you're kind of touting off here, like DDR3, 4, those are all also dependent, to make sure that they work together with one another. New motherboard technology is coming out all the time. You have to make sure that the motherboard, can actually understand that kind of memory, right? Like it's all connected at a pretty
Yeah.
base level.
Yeah, that's driven primarily by the generation of the processor. So when Intel or AMD bring out a new processor, very often they will design it, not very often, they'll always design it for the latest generation memory. So you can buy a motherboard, as you mentioned, that would take last generation processors, i7 800s, let's say, or 700s even, and they would use DDR3. The new generation ones use DDR4. Now, they're also, those memories they come in little slabs, little sticks almost, little circuit boards of their own. And they're keyed in such a way physically that you can't really plug a DDR4 into a DDR3 slot. So you're not going to mess up by doing that if you try to. But if you're going to a reasonably good store, a Best Buy or Circuit or anybody who has any experience selling these things, and you want to buy just components, they'll tell you what you need. But also, if you buy it online, pretty much the online stores will also indicate that this is a DDR4 or a DDR3 motherboard.
Right.
So I think you're in pretty safe situation that you're not going to, inadvertently get something that doesn't plug in together.
Right. Okay. So, and awesome. Now let's move on to, some of these graphics cards, because you were talking about, from the likes of AMD and NVIDIA, and the difference between discrete and integrated. Let's talk about what graphics cards are, kind of driving the technology of the future here, because, we have a question here about supercomputers, artificial intelligence, autonomous cars. Are these the same kind of graphics cards that, kind of any person would buy off the store shelf, and it's just kind of, a lot of them jerry-rigged together? Or do they have special GPUs that, are doing these kinds of things?
Well, they're very, very similar, put it that way. There's three types of graphics boards, add-in boards, that can be purchased. One is the consumer type, and let me just use NVIDIA as an example because it's a well-known company and popular. So NVIDIA's consumer-branded boards are called GTX or GeForce. There's also a category of what's called professional graphics. And these are the things that go into workstations. Workstations are a very, very powerful form of computer,
right.
Used primarily by engineers and designers. And NVIDIA's graphics board for the professional market is called Quadro. So it's a Quadro workstation board.
Okay.
Then there is the class of boards that you started out discussing that go into computers, data centers, supercomputers, etc. And those are called Tesla by NVIDIA. Now, the GPU on all three of those boards is basically the same. And it gets a little complicated now because just recently Intel has introduced a new GPU, which is specifically, as of today, only for the Tesla brand for the supercomputers. But up until that time, the GPU was pretty much the same. The thing that would make it different was how much memory you had on it. The professional graphics or the workstation always have a lot of memory on them, and the Tesla or the compute boards, GPU compute boards, have even more memory than that, up to 16 gigabytes, if you can imagine such a thing. So, and as you also can imagine, they go up in price. Now, clever people, usually found at universities and some labs, have taken consumer graphics boards, the GeForce class, and adapted them to GPU compute applications as well as professional graphics applications. There are nuances in doing that get involved with a thing called software driver.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to know your way around computers a little bit to be able to get the software driver to work correctly with the board you're dealing with. For example, if you wanted to build and use a workstation, and we're trying to cut corners on cost, let's say, you could conceivably buy a consumer brand board, a GeForce in this case, or a Radeon in the case of AMD, put that into a system, load the software driver for workstations, which is known as OpenGL, and with a little tinkering, you could get it to work on most applications. Now, I don't know if you want me to go into details of what those differences are, but for right now, let's just say that it can be done. But what you'll be doing actually is you'll be trading your time to try and trick it into working
Mm-hmm.
for the money you had hoped to save in buying a board that was designed to work that way. But sometimes people are willing to do that.
Right, and we have another gentleman that comes on the show. He is a graphics designer and an animation expert. And if you could talk a bit about why wouldn't and he's mentioned this as well about why wouldn't someone like a consumer, because there's this idea that the prosumer, the consumer who really wants the best for their system. But, that doesn't always mean that you want to put a, again, NVIDIA Tesla branded graphics card into a consumer computer because, those graphics cards, and, again, feel free to get into this or correct me, but they are very stable. Like they put a lot of emphasis on being stable in the calculations that they run. And then they also kind of double check themselves over and over so that they don't make mistakes, which is super important for, things like, supercomputers, crunching numbers, data. You don't want any of those mistakes where for consumer, it really doesn't matter, kind of for gaming, but for data crunching, it absolutely does. So like a Tesla branded, GPU may not run that much better than a consumer level for things like computer gaming because it's that trade-off of redundancy and, being solid.
Yep. Well, everything you said is absolutely correct. I mean, I don't know how much I could add to that. I'll give you a little background on it, though.
Sure.
When you talked about being super reliable, the workstation boards, the Quadro from NVIDIA and the Pro boards from AMD, whereas they still use basically the same GPU, they turn the clock down just a little bit. And you say, well, no, wait a minute. I thought it was just going to be the most high-performance board. Well, it is a high-performance board, but it's also a very, very reliable board. These things have to run 24/7. They have to be what we refer to as being bulletproof in the workstation is what I'm talking about. And so one of the ways you do that is by just pulling that clock speed back a little bit, because the faster you run a clock in any kind of silicon, whether it's a CPU, a GPU, doesn't matter what it is, the higher you run the clock, the higher the temperature gets. And the higher the temperature gets, the more dangerous area you get into with regard to failure. And even if it's not a catastrophic failure, you will actually age the chip. Running at a high speed with high temperatures over a prolonged period of time will actually make the chip wear out. I know that sounds kind of hard to visualize, but it really does happen. And so to add that extra degree of reliability, they actually run these cards as cool as they can. So that's just a nuance.
Yeah, and just off the top of your head, I don't really expect you to have an exact number, but I know that for like CPUs at least, the temperature that they really don't want you to hit is somewhere around 100 degrees Celsius or 212 Fahrenheit, because that's when the solder starts to melt and things like that. For any kind of novices who are thinking about maybe things like overclocking or building their own system, what would you kind of say is a good number for for you to hit with your GPU?
Well, I'm happy to tell you that the people who design these circuits, these chips, CPUs and GPUs and so forth, they're smarter than us. And And I mean that sincerely. I mean, they're the smartest damn people you're ever going to find. But the CPUs and GPUs today have dozens, approaching hundreds, of little temperature sensors inside the chip. And those temperature sensors then are monitored by a program that's running outside, another program. And if the temperature starts to get too close to what they consider a thermal limit, they will actually shut the chip down. And they'll do that either by removing the power or lowering the power, the voltage, or slowing the clock down, or in worst case situations, just simply turning the power off. They also will use that information to change the speed of the fan. And so if you're a gamer, for example, and you're running things, let's say, in an overclocked mode, which you can do, and you're playing a game that's really demanding, and there's plenty of them out there, you can actually hear the fan that's on the add-in board speed up as you get into certain situations in your game. There's a certain excitement that comes with that. It's like, it's like revving up a car, to get it to go faster. And one of the things that gamers do is they open up their systems so that they can hear that, because it just adds to the excitement level of playing a game.
Right. Right. No, and so makes perfect sense. And I think now that we've kind of talked about graphics, this is going to be a good show that I can point back to some of our newer listeners whenever I get these questions about graphics. I'll probably point them to this episode because that was a good kind of background. But now let's get to the fun things about graphics. And it's not it's not about exactly about the cards. It's what you can do with the cards. It's about what you can do with graphics. So let's talk about some of the differences between you already mentioned a workstation, kind of for the professional level, a personal computer. I think most people are familiar with the PC that they use. But let's talk about kind of smartphones, game consoles, TVs. Are there different are there even graphics cards in televisions nowadays, or talk about some of these other unique formats of graphics cards?
Sure. Well, in the two items that you mentioned, smartphones and TVs, and when you say smartphone, you can say tablet in the same breath because they're basically the same thing. But in those cases, you have a different type of chip design, although it will have the same elementary components as you would find in a PC. So if you think about the PC having a CPU in it and some memory, and maybe it has a discrete graphics board in it, and it will have another chip for communications so that you can get on the web, and it might have a couple of other chips for managing your peripheral devices. And so if you've looked at the motherboard, you see there's a lot of stuff going on there.
Yeah.
And you say, well, look at that motherboard, which is as big as a sheet of paper or more. How the heck do I get that in a smartphone that'll fit in my pocket and doesn't burn me while it's working? And yet these things seem to be able to do almost as much as what I can do with a PC. Well, the people who design those chips, and probably the best known one is a company called Qualcomm, build what is called an SoC, a system on a chip. And they do have GPUs in them, and they do have CPUs in them, and they have other things in them as well, including a thing called a DSP, a digital signal processor, which is used for things like managing audio, making audio work well for you, or video. And they also have radios. That's how you get to make the phone work, to talk to someone else, and other communications for Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. And so they have all that stuff, which is fantastic to imagine, in one chip called an SoC. So there's no boards like we're used to with a PC. It's just one little chip in there that you can't get at, you can't do anything to other than enjoy the use of it.
Right, and for those of us who have tried to open up some of these iPhones to try to fix them ourselves, and again that voids a lot of warranties, but exactly, good luck. It's very 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 tiny details, tiny screws, tiny hardware. It's
unbelievable.
It really is a marvel.
And they're built by robots. No human could do that. It's all robots build those things.
Yeah, very very precise machinery is building these things. But no, it's very cool to open up, and you're right. You see all the parts of a standard computer just shrunken down to an incredible size. So let's of course, when we talk about graphics cards, I think for a lot of people, or at least recently, what is the most demanding application of a graphics card is virtual reality. And so if you could talk a bit about, how graphics plays into VR, because we know VR demands a lot of resources from a system, but, how is it different than just maybe slapping a screen on your face or, sitting too close to your TV?
Uh-huh. Well, actually, it's not much different. Virtual reality, and there's different types of virtual reality. So let's focus on virtual reality of a headset. You say slapping on your face, for example, and we can use Oculus or HTC as a good example there. But basically, you put on this mask, and you mask yourself from the real world, which is important because you're going to be immersed in a different world. But it is basically a little screen, just as you said, in your face, up close to your eye, that you'll be looking at. So in that sense, it's not much different than getting up close to your PC. But one of the big differences is that the world that you're looking at, you can think of as being the inside of a dome, almost like a planetarium. Think of it like that. And whereas you can look around in any direction and/or look up and look down, and maybe say you're in a bubble might be an even more accurate description. So you have the ability to look around. Now, you get that same general capability when you move the mouse in a game. So you take your mouse and you move it around, and that makes your view of the world in the game change. Mm-hmm. That's a very functional and let's say satisfying experience, but it's not natural. I mean, we weren't raised to assume that to navigate in the world we had to move our hand around.
Right.
We just would move our head around. So in that sense, the virtual reality experience is a much more natural feeling because you look to the left and you see what's to the left of you, and up and down and so forth. So it's different in the way you engage with this artificial world, but other than that, it's pretty much the same thing.
Right, and that again is how it's kind of different from 3D. From 3D movies and television, in that sitting still and looking at something that is tricking your eye into thinking it has depth. Like you said, VR puts you in sort of a bubble, and it's it's not just in a kind of a picture box, but it's all around you. So that's how one way that those experiences definitely differ. So, but VR, it's certainly developing, certainly coming to an area near you, if not for a whole lot of different purposes, which I'm sure all the research that you do over at Jon Peddie, you are finding a lot of different uses in the workplace and the home. It's going to come there eventually, but for training purposes and things like that, it's pretty much already here. So. And by the way, John, would you mind staying over for a couple minutes after the break so we can, kind of continue our conversation?
Sure, no problem.
Sure, great. So yeah, and so we have about another minute, so we may get started just a bit. But actually, when we come back, John, let's talk about the difference between 4K, which is all the rage. It's hard to find a television nowadays that isn't 4K, but there are other standards such as ultra high definition, which may or may not be the same thing. There's 1440p, which a lot of people don't know about. And so, John, I think when we come back, we'll talk about different displays, monitors, HDR, things like that. Sound good?
Sound good.
All right. So, and everyone else out there, once again, we are talking to Dr. Jon Peddie, and yeah, he is the president of the Jon Peddie Research. And yeah, if you're watching the video portion, we have the website up there. And actually, I just noticed that, actually you have an event going up called Immersed, where we were we were actually talking to, what was that, Monday? We were talking to the general, was it Hyper? No, it was Immersive Technology Alliance. We were talking to them last Thursday. So
yeah, that's Neil Schrader.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, we were talking to them. So very cool. But yeah, lots of great information over at jonpeddie.com. Check it out. So the music means we're going to take a break. We'll be right back. More Computer America just after this. And hey, stay tuned. We have computer and technology news coming up as well. So we'll be right back.
Brother Wolf. 10 years ago, a group of locals banded together to create positive change. We took animals into our homes, held adoption events at local retailers, and talked to the community about our mission to help build a no-kill Asheville. A decade later, we have achieved so many victories for animals in need. There's been so much progress, yet there's still so much to do. As part of our year-long celebration, we encourage you to become a member of our special Compassionate Circle program. With a monthly donation of $10 or more, you will have behind-the-scenes access to the work we are doing at Brother Wolf. Our goal is to reach 1,000 members because we receive no government funding. Working together, we can help build and sustain no-kill communities. Learn more at compassionatecircle.bwar.org. We are a 501c3 tax-deductible organization.
And welcome back to the Computer America Show. It is 31 minutes past the hour as we continue on here with Dr. Jon Peddie of the Jon Peddie Research. And yeah, we're talking all things graphics and things like that. So John, like I was saying before, I think for the next couple minutes we should talk about, I think these are more often than not used as buzzwords. People tend to either ignore them or they think too highly of them, because they're great in sales pitches. It's like, hey, this is the greatest UHD 4K OLED AMOLED flat screen TV, and everyone's like, wow, that's a lot of letters and numbers. I'm amazed. Talk about some of these buzzwords.
Well, I love your description. I guess almost everybody should know what HD is by now because it's been around for about 20 years, believe it or not. Mm-hmm. But HD represents a set of numbers, which is expressed as the resolution, 1920 pixels across and 1080 lines of those pixels going down. So you say 19 by 10 for easy discussion. And if you do the math on that, it comes out to about a million, and 2 million rather, sorry. Right. And so that has been designated, I don't know who made this designation, as 1K. Well, the 1K really refers to the 1080 lines. TV has always been kind of measured and expressed and talked about the lines. And the reason for that is because of the technology that it takes to produce TV and send it over the airwaves and then reconstruct it at your house, and how many lines you could produce was a measure of merit. Just to give you a reference point, our older TV, which we refer to as SD, standard definition, that had about 480 lines. So HD TV has more than doubled the resolution in terms of lines that we see. So a 4K is, just like you might think it is, 4 of those. But it's not 4,000 lines. It's 2,000 lines, but doubled horizontally as well. So if you remember the numbers, I said it was 1920 by 1080 for one HD screen. If you could visualize putting 4 of them up in a square fashion, so right. You'd have 1, 2 across and 3, 4 underneath that, then you'd have, 4 by 20 for your resolution. So that's where the 4K comes from, is 4 HD screens. Now, it's pretty spectacular. There's been an issue with regard to, can you really see it? Answer to that question is yes. And even if you can you get any content to see? And that's been a little problematic, although it's getting better. And it's the same thing going back in history when TV first got color. Everybody wanted to have a color TV, and then the question was, well, yeah, but what are we going to watch on it? And it took a fair amount of time for color TV to get color content. Same thing was true when we moved to HD. It was terrific stuff, but there wasn't that much HD content. So we're now in that same evolutionary phase with 4K, where the content is slowly rolling out and getting there. As you might expect, there's a lot more 4K PC content than there is TV today. And in between the PC and the TV, there's a category of products known as game consoles, Sony PlayStation 4 and the Xbox. They are just now getting up to speed on 4K to be able to drive what they assume will be the 4K TVs in people's homes.
Right.
That's the big picture.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, but just to be
no
fair,
pun intended.
Yeah, no, big picture indeed. But but just to be fair, 4K. You were talking about the transition from standard to high definition. I will say that personally, just seeing the transition into 4K, it happened very fast. Like just going from kind of unknown to futuristic about 3 or 4 years ago, and then to the point where like this holiday season, almost everything's going to be 4K. Like 4K really became the standard very, very quickly.
Yeah, I think it will. And then just to make your toes really curl up, I can tell you that on my system here, I have an 8K screen.
Yeah.
Visualize that.
The only thing you're going to be able to watch on that is the 2020 Olympics, for the longest time. So
there's graphics programs that you can see it on, and actually games. Believe it or not, the games are so well designed. They scale up to 8K. So if you want to invest in an 8K model and see the finest detail of the game that you're playing, which I also have to say, the games of today are just extraordinary in the detail and the quality that's put into them. They're just amazing.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. No. We talked to a lot of gaming companies, and then even beyond that, just like I was just this weekend watching. Actually, this week I was watching this new game, Battlefront 2. It's in the Star Wars universe, and people were joking about how many pigeons there were, but what they're really referring to when they say there's a lot of pigeons in the game was that they had hundreds of moving leaves and hundreds of birds flying around, and the trees, you could see them move. Like it looked like a movie, but it's all rendered on your, on your computer, and it runs very, very well. It's something to definitely see.
And that can only be done if you have a good enough GPU to drive it.
Right, and to be fair, for the game I was just talking about, they did kind of optimize it for a GTX 1070, which is not the highest of NVIDIA cards, but a couple $100 for sure. But
it's a fun card.
Yeah, and so let's and before we move off of display technology, 2 other points I wanted you to kind of cover because you're doing so well include HDR. What is that, and should people care? And also, this idea of ultra wide, 21:9 aspect ratio, 1440p. Is that something people should maybe consider as well?
Sure. Well, the answer to both questions is yes. The thing about computer graphics, which does include TVs too, and game consoles and so forth, it's an honest technology. And what I mean by that is you genuinely get what you pay for. The more you spend on something that's using computer graphics, the better experience you're going to be. And so people come to me and they say, well, what should I get for a graphics board, or what should I get for a monitor, or what should I get for this or that, whatever it is. And I don't know why they come to me because I don't sell their stuff. But anyway.
Because you have a website, of course.
I tell them, look, if you think you can afford to spend $100, spend $110. You won't be sorry. And these things, they'll give you 2, 3, 4 years of delightful experience. So to wind that back to your question about HDR, HDR is a esoteric conversation, and it's tricky to explain it and not get yourself lost in the weeds about the technical details. Let me just say that it involves what's called color depth. And so if you look at your PC right now, the screen you're looking at has a color depth of 8 bits per primary color. And the primary colors are red, blue, and green. That's 24 bits. And within 24 bits, you can create millions and millions of shades. HDR takes that 2 steps further and gives you 10 bits per primary color. So now you have 30. And the way it's hard to get your mind around this, but it moves you from millions of colors to billions because it's a binary exponent.
Right.
The better way to think about it, the easier way to think about it, is if you've ever looked at a TV or a game for that matter and seen what's called banding, when there's a large display, let's say like the sky, for example, or a large dark area, and you see these bands. So if it's supposed to be light blue at the top and dark blue at the bottom, it'll get from light blue to dark blue, but it'll make visible steps in doing that. That's what's called banding. Excuse me. And that banding is due to the lack of color depth. And you say, well, how come when I go to the movies, I don't see banding? Well, because the movies have been presenting us with not just 10-bit, but 12-bit, even more if you can imagine that, 12-bit data, color depth on the screen. And so then we take that movie and we shrink it down so it'll fit within the transportation system that we have, which is, cable, satellite, over the air, to get it to our TVs, and our TVs present it to us in 8-bit color, and we get the banding. So the bandwidth now has gone up on almost every communication system we can think of. The problem is we're still living with old monitors and old TVs, and so they just can't take advantage of that bandwidth even though they're getting higher quality stuff. So HDR is going to correct that, and you will get, if you haven't seen an HDR picture next to a normal HD picture, let's say, the difference is between night and day. You look at the HDR picture and you just see so much more richness and depth in the colors. And then you go and look at a standard one, you go, oh my God, how could I have ever put up with that? It's like going from AM radio to FM. It's just, while you had AM, you loved it. When you had HD, you loved it. But now you're going to get 4K with HDR, and you're going to think, my God, how did I ever tolerate that other stuff? But the problem is,
go ahead.
Excuse me, I just say the problem is, it's one of those things that I could talk to you all day about, and you would never get it. You have to experience it. You have to go see it.
Right.
It's just too subjective.
And I think now's a good time to give a shout out to all of our AM stations out there. Thank you for tuning into the Computer America Show. And it's completely fair. I mean, I listen to AM sometimes in my car, and it's great for when you are listening to the content, but when you tune into something like an HD kind of internet stream, the amount of data that is just transferred, it's new formats are definitely incredible. And also, I kind of wanted to get your opinion on this as well, where one of our consumer electronics experts, they said that, the jump from 1080p to 4K, that certainly is something, but they think that for this generation of technology, the jump to HDR is a bigger deal than the jump to 4K.
There's a lot of ways to, again, you get into the numbers, but there's a lot of ways to express that, but the person telling you is correct. The way to think about it is, think about your screen as being an XY piece of grid paper, and think about the color as being the sheets behind it. So if I have this piece of grid paper, and that's what I'm seeing, and then I have 7 more behind it, which represents the color depth, right? So now if I add 2 more of those, think of what that does to the total number of little squares in that graph paper that I'm looking at, and it just drives the number up incredibly. Well, when you do that, you drive the number up of the amount of memory you have to have, you drive the number up of the amount of power that you have to give to drive that memory, you drive up the number for the amount of communication speed, the bandwidth that you have, so everything gets pushed up. And so the demand that HDR places on a system is incredible, and that's one of the reasons why they're going to be a little expensive for a while, because some people are just not going to be able to get benefit out of it because they're not going to have the infrastructure to support it.
Right, and that's something that we're that we I say we, but I mean like cable providers, they're running into delivering 4K, and you know, it's a lot more data. It's not always the easiest to afford. I mean, heck, that's why if you have things like Netflix, you have to pay a premium. You have to pay an extra $5 or whatever it is over the base, is because you do, you know, consume that much more data. So, and also I noticed, you know, I was kind of poking around your website, and you have, you know, right there front and center, published a couple weeks ago. If you wanted to comment on this, the idea of multiple displays, you know, having 4K is great, but, you know, you could fit, you know, like you mentioned, it was the idea of having 4 1080p displays, you know, in kind of a square pattern. Does that mean that a 4K replaces multiple monitors, or are multiple monitors still an ideal setup for a lot of people?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the answer is yes and yes. And the reason it's such a crazy answer is that, yes, a 4K could indeed replace 4 HD monitors. The difference is the size of the pixel. And so if I had 4 HD monitors, I could arrange those monitors in a semicircle fashion so that they would wrap around me, so to speak. Think about it like that, which would give me a wider field of view and potentially let me, it seems crazy to say this, but potentially see a little bit more. And the reason I would be seeing a little bit more is because I'd also be using my peripheral vision to a certain extent.
Right.
If I skinny that down to just one monitor, the pixels will get smaller. That means I'm going to have to find some way to move the monitor maybe closer to me, or wear glasses or do something, but to be able to get the benefit of it. So it's a trade-off. Now the trade-off is also driven by the user's space. Do I have space for 4 monitors? That's not a trivial thing. They're big. Just to cite myself again, I mentioned to you the 8K monitor. That's on our gaming machine.
Right.
My personal workstation, I have, and I know this is going to sound boisterous and obnoxious, but I have 3 32-inch 4K monitors that I sit look at. Yeah, I know.
I like that.
I know.
Yeah.
But look, this is my business. This is what I do. But the point is that it is, for me, absolutely necessary, because I will have, no exaggeration, 5 different applications open. I'll have 2 big spreadsheets. I'll have a couple of word processors. I'll have my email client. I'll have a whole bunch of browsers open and so forth. And I move between those applications very, very quickly and frequently. And so it's just, for me, a productivity enhancer. And that's the real bottom line for putting in multiple displays, is it improves your productivity. And the other way to think about it is think about what we have tried to do with a PC. Basically what we've tried to do is we've tried to replicate our desk. So if we have a desk that's, let's say, 4 feet wide and maybe 2.5 feet deep,
Right.
and we cover that thing with papers, reports, and books, and memos, and other things, and a telephone, and what have you. And now we're going to try and squeeze that same experience into a 21-inch monitor. Well, you can't do it. I mean, it just doesn't work. So you're compromising, and the way you deal with that compromise is you do what's called flipping. So you flip from one app to the other app to the other app to the other app, and so you burn time doing that application flipping. And that's where you get the productivity pickup, is if I don't have to do the application picking, I can just look around on this array of screens I have, your efficiency goes up. And that's and the cost, by the way, I should add, the cost of adding an extra monitor is I won't say trivial, but it's so low today. It's a few $100s, and monitors last for minimum of 5 years. So the investment, you'd spend more on Starbucks than you would a monitor over 5 years. So that's not a factor. The graphics boards that you can buy from AMD and NVIDIA today, all of them for free support multiple monitors. So there's no cost there. There's no technical barrier. You just basically literally plug them in and they work. So then the only real obstacle comes down to is, do I have room for all these damn things? And unfortunately, some people don't. If you're living in a small apartment or you have a cramped office or something, then you can't do it. In that case, a large 30 or 35-inch 4K monitor is a perfect solution.
Right. No, very, very well said. And, I don't think there's too much that I would add to it. I would add that, I personally do use 3 monitors as well. And, 2 is great, 3 is better. And
Yep.
I would definitely advocate for it. So with that being said, we had a couple more questions here. I don't think we're going to get to them. But one last question that I did want to get to, it involved you. And, obviously you seem very knowledgeable. I'll be the first to admit that. You have a book, as I understand it. What's this book about, and tell us a bit about it.
Sure, happy to. It's about augmented reality, and augmented reality is a very, very exciting and somewhat complicated topic, technology as well, because it comes in so many forms. And so the easiest form to think of, and I thank these people every day, is Pokemon, because Pokemon illustrates what augmented reality is about. It used to be when I would start to talk about augmented reality, people would say, well, what is that? Mm-hmm. And I'd have to explain to them how it works. Now I just say Pokemon. They go, oh, yeah, I get it. Saves me a lot of time. So I love Pokemon. So that's augmented reality on your mobile phone. Right. Another form of augmented reality is a head-up display that could be in your car or your private airplane or your boat or whatever. And if you've not seen a head-up display in a car, I encourage you to go test drive a car with it today, because it'll change your life. You'll find that you probably can't or certainly don't want to drive without a heads-up display. It's just so amazing. And the new ones that are coming out, in fact, the 2018 cars that come out, they are going to have terrific heads-up display. Like it's going to be like someone was just leading you by the hand and telling you, go down here, turn left. And these aren't just navigation controls like you might get on the screen in the center console. It's that plus the actual visual dimension aspect of where you're going. And so if an arrow says, shows you that you should drift to the left, drift is perhaps not the right word. Let's say move to the left. Right. That's more accurate and more confidence building than it is looking at the screen in the center of the console. Plus the fact you're looking at the road, not at the console, which is very important. So you have that. Another form of augmented reality, and remember, this augmented reality is you're seeing the real world. It's not VR. You're seeing the real world with information superimposed on top of it. So another example of it is a helmet. And helmets are useful to people who are in sports, riding motorcycles, skiing, things of that nature, but they're extremely important to people who are in hazardous areas, hard hat areas, first responders. So visualize a fireman, for example, walking into a building. Building is burning. He doesn't know if there's anybody in there. He also doesn't know where the heck he is. Where's the door, where's the floor, et cetera, et cetera. All that information is now available to him on the screen whilst he walks into this house, this building, whatever it is, to determine, if there's anybody in there that needs to be saved or if there's something's going to explode. Yeah. So very, very valuable.
So, and by the way, and just real quick, for anyone out there who's interested in that kind of technology, I will say the last time that we explored it was with a company called Revu Worldwide. It's kind of like Rearview, but Revu. They make motorcycle helmets with the heads-up display and rear view display. Very, very cool technology. And John, I really do hate to kind of cut you off, but we've you already given more than enough of your time, and we have a few things to get to. But I will say that if people want to check out your book, because again, this sounds very interesting, where can they go?
Oh, just to Amazon. Just type in Peddie Augmented Reality or just even augmented reality, it should pop up.
All right, yeah, and if you're watching the video portion, we have your book there up on the screen, and again, check it out on Amazon. And again, everyone, JonPeddie.com. We've been talking to Dr. Jon Peddie himself, and John, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
I'm happy to do it. I love talking about pixels, so it's not a problem for me.
All right, great. So, yep, and everyone, if you want to hear this show or last time that we had Jon Peddie Research on, check out Computer America. And John, until next time, thanks for being on the show. Have a great day.
All righty, you too. Bye now.
Bye-bye. All right, and there he goes, everyone. So again, you can check that out. We have links in the show notes if you want to check any of that out. But before we get too much further, I wanted to, at least get this in. This is from one of our sponsors, and we have to, we have to definitely get to this. So here we go, and we'll try to get a computer and technology news story in as well if we have time. But here we go. So if you are, maybe if you're hiring and you wish it could be easier, if you wish that you had a better way to streamline the process, make it less time consuming, well, hey, when you're busy and you could still be smart about the way you hire. And that's where our sponsor ZipRecruiter comes in. And here they are. ZipRecruiter is a bit different from most of the other choices you've heard out there, where with ZipRecruiter, you can post your job to over 100 of the web's leading job boards with a single click. Very important. Very time saving. So you can rest easy knowing that your job is being seen by the right candidates. And then ZipRecruiter puts its smart matching technology to work, actively notifying qualified candidates about your job within minutes of posting. So you receive the best possible matches. And that's why ZipRecruiter is different, where unlike other hiring sites, ZipRecruiter doesn't depend on the right candidates finding you, it finds them. Very important if you're trying to find, obviously the right person for the job. So you can even get a head start on the interview process by adding screening questions to your job post to help identify the most qualified candidates. So you don't have to waste time sorting through stacks of resumes to find the perfect fit. And here we go, saying that no wonder why 80%, check that out, 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate in just a single day. Very impressive. So and then of course, we didn't even mention the easy to use ZipRecruiter dashboard that lets you manage the hiring process from start to finish. Very important. So ZipRecruiter, it's the smartest way to hire. And you can find out today why it's the smartest way to hire, where you can go to ZipRecruiter.com/computer. ZipRecruiter.com/computer, and you can try it for free. Post your job, find candidates, and hey, maybe even hire the right person for the job. Check that out one last time, ZipRecruiter.com/computer. All right, now, unfortunately, I just kind of looking through the stories here, and just to give you some headlines that you can find at Computer America, we have obviously, links to some of the stories that we definitely wanted to get to, but our guest was so engaging for the first part of the show that, hey, no problem whatsoever saving these for a rainy day. But here's some stories that you should definitely check out, including there's one making the rounds. It's extremely popular. It's about Google and their earbuds. They have the new $150 earbuds that kind of mimic Apple. But one way that they don't mimic Apple is that, and by the way, they're called the Google Pixel Buds. Well, they're translators. And not just some kind of, active translation. It's passive translation. So, it picks up any of the spoken languages. I think it pairs with a smartphone. You speak into the smartphone, and it immediately translates the language in your ear. So you could be English, going to Germany, hearing German, and you could listen real time and translate real time these languages. Very, very cool. And they even had a demonstration on stage. So check that out. Babelfish actually here, and there are some overpriced earbuds. So we have those stories and more at computeramerica.com, including, should you be charged with drunk driving if you have a driverless car? Well, they're hoping that that's not the case. And also, would you watch a live stream of Supreme Court oral arguments? And too bad, they said they don't want that. So anyways, those articles and more at computeramerica.com. I want to say one more time, thank you, Dr. Jon Peddie of Jon Peddie Research, as our guest today. Very informative, and covered a lot of bases. So we'll be back tomorrow with the man himself, Ralph Bond, as we do other computer and technology news and more, of course, from Autodesk. So be sure to tune in for that. Same time, same place, Monday through Friday, 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern. And folks, until next time, Have a great day. Bye-bye.